Imagine sitting in a VIP seat you paid a fortune for, only to be asked to move to the back because someone else is deemed more important than you. That's exactly what happened to Malik Johnson, and this video changed everything. Before we start the story, don't forget to hit the like button, share, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Also, turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. Alright, let's get into the story. Malik Johnson never liked airports. Not the noise, not the lines, not the way people rushed through security like they were running from something. But today, he felt different. Today, he was proud. His keynote at the Minneapolis Future Tech Conference had been more than just a success. It was a defining moment. Standing ovation, handshakes from venture capitalists, a few quiet nods from competitors who usually never looked his way. Malik didn't brag. He didn't need to. He let his work speak. But on this day, the work had shouted. He was exhausted in the best way. Not the kind of tired that made you want to collapse, but the kind that made you grateful. Grateful to have earned rest, to have done something right, to have delivered. As he rolled his carry-on bag through Terminal 1, his mind wasn't on politics, or policies, or the state of the world. It was on the little barbecue joint back in Charlotte, the one that closed early on Sundays. He was thinking about his kids, his wife, his bed. The flight home felt like a small reward. A VIP ticket, seat 2A, extra legroom, window seat, early boarding. Nothing fancy, just space, quiet, a bubble where he could breathe and disappear for a few hours. Malik was a tall man, broad shoulders, deep voice, the kind of presence that people noticed but didn't fully understand. He had the look of someone who used to play ball, maybe linebacker, but now most of his battles were behind conference tables and code reviews. His beard was silvering at the edges. His eyes were sharp. He had the posture of a man who had carried too much weight for too long and still stood tall anyway. He didn't dress to impress. Not anymore. Just clean jeans, a sport coat, and worn sneakers he loved too much to replace. Power, he had learned, didn't always come in suits or status. Sometimes it came from simply showing up, owning your space, knowing your worth. As he stepped onto the plane, a familiar calm settled over him. The cabin smelled like recycled air and lemon-scented cleaner. Seat 2A greeted him like an old friend. He placed his bag in the overhead bin, sat down, and exhaled. He wasn't Malik the speaker anymore. He was just Malik, the man who paid for his seat, who earned his rest, and who, just for once, wanted to be left alone. He opened his laptop, started scrolling through emails, thought about writing a quick note to his wife, but then came the voice. Soft at first, polite, too polite. "Excuse me, sir. We have a small request." He looked up. A flight attendant stood beside him, lips curled into a professional smile that never touched her eyes. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "One of our frequent flyers is seated toward the back. He's asked if you'd be willing to switch seats with him. Just a minor mix-up." Malik blinked, confused. "I'm sorry. Why?" She hesitated. "Just a beat. He's part of our loyalty program." He was expecting an upgrade. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. We'd really appreciate your cooperation." Malik glanced around the cabin. It was half empty. Plenty of space. "Where exactly would I be moving?" She pointed toward the back. "Row 24. Malik raised an eyebrow, gave a polite but firm smile. "I'd prefer to keep my seat. Thank you. I paid for this one." Her smile stiffened. "Just a fraction." "Of course, sir. I'll let the team know." She walked away, her heels clicking softly down the aisle. Malik watched her go. That should have been the end of it. But deep in his chest, something shifted. A pressure. Not fear. Not anger. Just a feeling. A whisper. Something's coming. And it would come faster than he expected. Malik had always believed that calm was a kind of power. A silent strength. He'd learned it the hard way. Through years of proving himself twice as capable for half the recognition. Calm got him through interviews, boardrooms, backhanded compliments. Calm was how he survived. But 5 minutes after declining to give up a seat, calm was no longer being respected. It was being tested. Another flight attendant approached. Older, senior, the type whose smile had long since faded into habit. Her voice was colder, firmer. It carried a practiced authority, the kind you couldn't question without being labeled difficult. "Sir, we understand you declined to switch seats earlier, but unfortunately, we're going to need you to move." Malik looked up slowly. There was no confusion in his eyes this time, just quiet disbelief. "I don't understand," he said. "I paid for this seat. There was no issue when I checked in." "It's company policy," she said crisply. "When there's a seating conflict involving executive-level passengers, we prioritize our most loyal customers. We ask for your cooperation." "Executive level," Malik repeated. "Is he staff?" "No, but he's one of our highest-tier members. Our loyalty program recognizes frequent flyers with priority accommodations." "So let me be clear," Malik said, keeping his voice even. "You're asking me to move from a seat I paid for because someone else, who didn't pay for it, has more loyalty points?" The attendant blinked. Just once. Her eyes shifted. "We can offer a complimentary drink and a $75 voucher for the inconvenience." Malik stared at her, not with rage, but with that slow-burning disappointment that hits harder than shouting. "So I'm being removed from the seat because someone else is considered more important to your airline?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was loud. Passengers nearby had started to watch. A woman in 3B turned her head slightly. A man in 1C paused his crossword puzzle. No one said anything, but their eyes were listening. Malik inhaled, then exhaled, the breath of a man counting his dignity like dollars in his pocket. "I'm not moving," he said softly. The attendant didn't argue. She didn't threaten. She didn't even blink. She just nodded once and walked away. And for a moment, Malik thought it was over. But it wasn't. Another 5 minutes passed. Then came the third wave. This time, it was a younger staff member, clipboard in hand, tight-lipped, no warmth, no explanation, no eye contact. "Mr. Johnson, please gather your things. You've been reassigned to seat 24B. Just like that. No request. No conversation. A command dressed up as a courtesy. Malik sat still for a long second. His hand rested on the armrest, fingers curled into the fabric. The silence around him thickened. He could feel eyes on him. Could feel judgment, pity, confusion. He could feel the weight of it all pressing against his spine. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just stood, took his carry-on, and walked. The aisle stretched like a tunnel. The walk felt longer than it should have. The air felt heavier. People pretended not to look. Others didn't bother pretending. As he passed row 12, a young woman whispered, "That's not right." In row 14, an older man nodded slightly, maybe in sympathy, maybe in shame. Malik reached 24B and sat between a teenager in basketball shorts and an elderly woman who kept asking if this was the flight to St. Louis. He stared out the window. He didn't blink. He didn't move. His chest burned, but his face remained still. He'd been through worse. Been underestimated, overlooked, talked down to. But this was different. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and it had been delivered with the precision of someone who had done this before. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was polished, rehearsed, professional, and that made it so much worse. Somewhere behind him, the man who took his seat laughed at something, ordered sparkling water like the world had rearranged itself for his comfort. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. The system already had. Malik didn't touch his phone. He didn't text anyone. He didn't tweet. He just sat there, hands folded, heart tight. But 5 rows behind him, someone had recorded everything. And by the time the plane touched down, the rest of the world would be watching. The flight hadn't even taken off, but something in the air had already shifted. It wasn't the engines humming to life or the cabin lights dimming overhead. It was the silence, the uneasy, loaded kind, the kind that hums beneath your skin and dares you to speak. Malik sat in 24B, surrounded by strangers who didn't know whether to look away or lean in. He kept his eyes fixed out the window, not blinking, not breathing too deeply, just existing, just holding himself together, piece by piece. He heard the quiet murmur 2 rows behind him. They moved that guy. Yeah, I saw. He paid for that seat. I heard him say it. No one said the words out loud, but everyone knew what they were thinking. If that had been me, if I had said no, if I had looked like him. Next to him, the teenager in basketball shorts glanced over. That was messed up, man. Malik didn't answer. Not because he didn't agree, but because he was too tired to carry the weight of someone else's shock. But just a few rows ahead, someone had captured everything. Her name was Janie Ruiz. 16. Sharp-eyed. Observant. She hadn't planned to record anything serious. Just little clips for her stories. To show her friends she was traveling solo to visit her aunt in Charlotte. But when she saw the flight attendant lean in and ask that tall, calm man to give up his seat, something in her gut told her, record now. She didn't film it for drama. She filmed it because something about the way it was done felt wrong. Not illegal. Not loud. Just wrong in a way that leaves a mark. She clipped the video. No filters. No effects. No hashtags. She uploaded it to TikTok and typed just 4 words. He paid for it. Then she hit post. Nothing dramatic. No music. No voiceover. Just raw footage. One man, calmly refusing to be erased. 3 flight attendants, politely forcing it anyway. And a walk of quiet humiliation that echoed louder than any argument could have. The video began to move. Slowly at first. Then all at once. One comment turned to 10. Then 100. Then 10,000. Someone reposted it on Twitter. Another added captions. Someone else stitched it with the words, "We're still doing this in 2025. By the time Malik leaned his head back and closed his eyes, the entire internet was watching a moment he hadn't even planned to share. His phone buzzed once. Then again. Then again. He ignored it. He thought about his son's basketball tryouts, his daughter's science project, the shoes he promised to fix for his wife. He thought about real life. Normal life. Up front, the man in 2A ordered sparkling water with lemon. The flight attendants laughed at his jokes. They asked if he needed anything else. Malik heard every word. He didn't turn around. He didn't react. He just sat there. And somewhere above the clouds, a storm had already begun to form. Not in the sky, but in the collective anger of strangers who had seen something too familiar and finally decided, not this time. Malik didn't know he was trending. He didn't know his calm refusal had become a headline. He didn't know that somewhere in a living room in Chicago, a producer had already sent the video to their editor with the subject line, "We need to run this today." He didn't know, because he was still trying to let it go. The plane cruised at 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign was off. The cabin settled into the quiet hum of mid-flight, but Malik couldn't relax. His body was still in 24B, but his dignity was somewhere near 2A. He turned over his phone. There were notifications, missed calls, messages from numbers he didn't recognize. He blinked, clicked one link from a colleague. There he was, on video. His voice, his face. That moment, the moment the flight attendant said company policy. The moment he said, "I paid for this seat." The comments underneath came in waves. "This is why people don't trust corporations." He handled that with more grace than I ever could. He deserves more than a refund. He deserves justice. Malik stared at the screen, stunned. Not hurt, not angry, just surprised. He never expected anyone to care. The whole thing had felt so personal, so quiet, so isolating. But now it was public, and the public was angry. By the time the flight began its descent into Chicago, the story had spread beyond TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. News sites had picked it up. Journalists were asking for interviews. Hashtags were forming. The man who took his seat hadn't even noticed. The crew up front served him coffee with a smile. But in the back, Malik's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text from a friend. "Bro, you're all over the internet." Email from a local paper. "Would you be open to a statement?" Message from a former co-worker. "I remember this happening to me once. I didn't say anything. I wish I had." The wheels touched down. The plane rolled to the gate, and as passengers stood to grab their bags, Malik felt the difference in the air. More glances. More whispers. One man stared openly from 3 rows up, phone in hand, screen still playing the video. Malik met his eyes. The man looked away. The teenage girl who filmed the clip, Janie, turned in her seat, just enough to see Malik. Her eyes weren't apologetic. They were fierce. She didn't look guilty. She looked ready. Malik powered off airplane mode. The vibration from his phone shook his leg. He scrolled through the headlines. Black man removed from VIP seat sparks national outrage. Airline under fire for downgrading paying passenger. Passenger demoted mid-flight due to loyalty status. It didn't feel real. It felt like he was reading about someone else. Some other story. Some other person. But it was him. His name. His face. The quiet moment he had tried to endure had become the moment the world chose not to ignore. The seat had been taken from him. But now, millions were giving it back. The plane doors opened with a soft hiss. Malik stepped into the jet bridge, bag in hand, heartbeat steady. Behind him, passengers filed out. Some moved quickly, heads down. Others slowed as they passed him. Subtle glances, careful looks. But no one said anything. At least, not yet. Inside the terminal, it only took 5 minutes. A young man in a red hoodie approached him near baggage claim. Barely 20, maybe less. Nervous energy in every step. Mr. Johnson? Malik turned, a little surprised. Yeah, I just wanted to say. I saw the video. That wasn't right. What they did. I just thank you for not yelling. You handled it better than I would have. Malik gave a small nod. Appreciate that, he said, though the words felt far away. The kid looked like he wanted to say more, but instead, he stepped back into the crowd, disappearing into the noise. Malik kept walking. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. Then another. The headline pinned to the top of his screen read, "Passenger removed from VIP seat mid-flight. Outrage grows." He swiped it away. But it didn't stop. There were emails now. Dozens. From reporters, news stations, strangers. A message from someone at CNN. Another from a senior producer at a morning show. Even LinkedIn messages were coming in from journalists, human rights advocates, and people with nothing to gain, but something to say. He reached the exit doors, the cold Chicago air brushing against his face like a reset button. He found a bench near passenger pickup and sat down. Across from him, a woman in a peacoat stared at her phone. Malik's face was on the screen. Her mouth opened slightly in recognition. Their eyes met. She looked down fast, ashamed, embarrassed, maybe both. Malik looked away. But it was too late. This wasn't his anymore. The story had left his hands. It belonged to the crowd now, to the millions who had seen a man be quietly displaced from a space he had earned, and recognized something all too familiar. Across the country, the conversation had begun to shift. People weren't just reacting. They were remembering their own moments of being pushed aside, talked down to, moved around, treated like less, not with violence, but with ease. Because what happened to Malik wasn't loud. It wasn't bloody. It was worse. It was normal. By the next morning, Malik's name was everywhere. Trending hashtags, cable news tickers, viral reposts. But it wasn't just the clip anymore. It was the meaning behind it. Bright Airlines issued a generic statement. We are aware of the incident involving Mr. Johnson on Flight 624. We value our guests and are conducting an internal review. The internet didn't buy it. The comments came fast. You value your guests. You just removed one. Where's the apology? Where's the accountability? Malik sat in his hotel room, sipping coffee in silence, watching his name scroll across the bottom of a television screen. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't tried to start a movement. But sometimes, movements start on their own. And all it takes is one person, sitting quietly, in the wrong seat, at the right time. For a full day, Malik stayed quiet, while cable news panels debated his dignity, while hashtags trended and celebrities retweeted the clip, while strangers flooded his inbox with stories of their own. Malik didn't say a word. He watched. He listened. And he waited, not because he didn't care, but because he wanted to be sure. Because if he was going to speak, it wouldn't be to perform. It would be to tell the truth. The email came just after noon. Subject line, "Good morning from CNN. We'd love to speak with you today, if you're open to it." He read it twice, then put his phone down. He wasn't ready. Not yet. The attention wasn't the hard part. It was the weight of becoming a symbol when all you wanted was peace. The weight of being asked to represent thousands of moments like yours. The weight of having your silence mistaken for consent, and your calm mistaken for weakness. That night, as the city lights blinked below his hotel window, Malik finally answered a call. It was Monique Glass, a senior producer at a national morning show. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for picking up. I'll keep this brief. We saw the video. We understand this probably isn't how you planned your week, but if you're willing to speak to us, we'll give you the space to tell your story in your own words." Malik paused. "And if I speak?" he asked. "What exactly do you expect me to say?" "Whatever feels right to you," Monique replied. "We're not trying to script you. I don't want to be part of something performative," he said. "Understood. I'm not looking to start a war," Malik continued. "But people need to know how normal this felt. How routine. That's what made it so dangerous." "We agree," she said quietly. "Let us know when you're ready." He called back an hour later. He wasn't looking for followers or clout. He wasn't trying to go viral again. But the messages kept coming, not just from supporters, but from flight attendants, pilots, hospitality workers, customer service reps. Anonymous messages. One in particular stuck with him. It read, "I've been told to do what they did to you. Reassign someone for a preferred flyer. I hated it. It felt wrong. I'm sorry it happened to you." That night, Malik set up a small webcam in the corner of his hotel suite. He wore a plain, dark shirt. No logos. No slogans. Just Malik. Just a man. He looked into the camera, and after a long breath, he spoke. "I want to talk about what happened to me on Flight 624. He began. He didn't yell. He didn't name names. He didn't demand revenge. He explained how they smiled when they asked him to move. How calm they were when they forced him. How no one apologized. Not once. And how that silence, that polished procedure, made it worse. "I'm not here to get free tickets," he said. "I'm not here for claps or sympathy. I'm just asking one thing. How many people get treated like this and don't have a camera nearby?" The video was under 4 minutes. No music. No edits. Just truth. By morning, it had 6.3 million views. And the story was no longer about a seat. It was about a system, and the man who calmly refused to disappear inside it. It wasn't the most dramatic video. There were no shouts, no tears, no call-outs. Just a man looking into a camera, speaking slowly, clearly, without bitterness. And somehow, that's what made it unstoppable. People didn't just watch it. They felt it. They replayed his words in their heads. How many people get treated like this and don't have a camera nearby? It hit harder than anything Airbright had released. Because it was honest. And honesty, raw, unscripted, unpolished, spreads faster than spin. Within hours, producers filled Malik's inbox. News anchors wanted exclusives. Brands offered partnerships. Influencers tried to tag him into their causes. He ignored most of them. He agreed to just 2 interviews. One with a local Chicago station, and one with NPR. He wanted the message to stay clear, not commercial. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted the truth to stay in focus. In the Chicago interview, the host leaned in gently. "Mr. Johnson, a lot of people are calling you a symbol. A hero even. How do you feel about that?" Malik almost smiled. "I feel like I got kicked out of a seat I paid for," he said. "That doesn't make me a hero. That makes me human." He paused. "I think the only reason this caught fire is because it's familiar. Everyone's had a moment like that. A moment where you're told, not with words, but with actions, that you don't belong in a space you've earned." The host didn't say anything. He didn't have to. And the part that sticks with me most, Malik continued, is that no one apologized. Not really. They followed the script. They offered vouchers, smiles, but they never saw me. That interview aired the same afternoon. And when it did, the story changed again. Because Malik didn't scream. He didn't accuse. He didn't even bring up race. But he didn't have to. His story was too familiar to ignore, too real, too specific, too collective. Behind closed doors at Airbright's headquarters in San Diego, the panic was no longer just a PR problem. It was a credibility crisis. Executives held emergency meetings. Legal advisors urged restraint. Shareholders were furious. The public didn't want an investigation. They wanted accountability. What pushed everything over the edge wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a celebrity tweet. It wasn't even the media. It was the volume. The sheer volume of everyday people, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, students, sharing their own stories. One woman posted how she was forced to give up her seat late in pregnancy because a frequent flyer wanted to sit next to his coworker. A man in his 50s commented that he'd been downgraded mid-flight because someone with platinum status arrived late to the gate. Different stories. Same feeling. Same system. Malik read them all. He didn't reply to most. He didn't need to. Because for the first time, he didn't feel alone in what happened. And neither did the people watching him. 2 weeks after the flight, Malik received an email that made him pause. It wasn't from a news outlet or a brand looking for a campaign. It was from a man named Carlton Drew, senior director at Horizon Mobility Group, the parent company behind several major airlines, including Airbright. Subject line: "We'd like to speak with you." Off the record, Malik didn't answer it right away. He read the message twice, then closed his laptop and sat in silence. He wasn't interested in photo ops. He wasn't looking to become the poster child for corporate redemption, but the offer stayed with him. 2 days later, curiosity won. He called the number. Carlton answered on the second ring. "Mr. Johnson, I appreciate you calling. I'll be quick. We've seen what you had to say, and some of us are listening. We'd like to invite you to consult with our leadership board. Help us rethink how we train staff, handle seating conflicts, and approach accountability. Paid, of course. No strings. Just perspective. The kind we clearly don't have enough of." Malik was quiet for a long moment. "Why me?" Carlton's voice softened. "Because you told the truth. And people believed you." Malik leaned forward. "And what exactly do you want to change?" "That's what we're still trying to figure out." Malik told him he'd think about it. That night, sitting on the porch with Leona, his wife, he told her about the call. She sipped her tea and looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think they're scared of more bad press," Malik said. She shrugged. "Probably. But that doesn't mean you can't still help shape something better." He thought about that. Not just the offer, but the moment on the plane, the way they'd smiled while displacing him, the way they made it sound so casual, like asking about pretzels or peanuts. That feeling, that strange, sharp quiet, still sat in his chest like a stone. But maybe, just maybe, he could make sure no one else had to carry it. The next morning, he replied to the email. "I'll do it," he wrote. On one condition. He asked that every session begin with a voice recording, an anonymous testimony from a real passenger or crew member. Good or bad. No branding. No edits. Just truth. Read out loud. In the room. Before anything else was discussed. Carlton agreed. And 2 weeks later, Malik Johnson walked into a polished glass boardroom in Dallas. 12 people in suits. A whiteboard full of charts. And for once, they weren't talking. They were listening. Someone pressed play on the first recording. It was a woman's voice. "I was forced to downgrade a man last year, just like Malik. I wanted to say no, but the policy was clear. I still think about the look on his face." The room went silent. Then someone looked at Malik and asked, "Do you think the public overreacted?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blink. He just said, "No. I think people were just waiting for an example they could finally see." They didn't ask that question again. The change came faster than anyone expected. For days after Malik walked into that boardroom, Airbright Airlines released a second statement. No vague regrets. No corporate jargon. No soft language. Just this. "We sincerely apologize to Mr. Malik Johnson. Our internal investigation has confirmed that protocol was misapplied. We take full responsibility for the mistreatment he experienced on Flight 624. Effective immediately. The flight crew involved has been terminated. New mandatory training procedures are being implemented across all staffing levels. It wasn't perfect. But it was something, and that something sent a shockwave. The headlines were immediate. Airbright fires crew after viral video exposes seating discrimination. Airline under pressure. Loyalty policies under review. The moment Malik had been forced out of his seat had become the moment a billion-dollar industry had to sit down and listen. On the internet, the reaction was electric. Janie Ruiz, the teenager who had filmed the video, posted again, her face on camera, her voice steady. Most grown-ups would have let it slide, she said. He didn't. He spoke for people like me. Her clip went viral too. People began tagging Malik in their stories. Single moms, veterans, college students, nurses, passengers who had been silently removed, downgraded, brushed aside. Their voices filled the comment sections, message boards, and inboxes. Screenshots of internal memos leaked from other airlines. They were reevaluating seating reassignment policies. Some quietly erased loyalty-based overrides. Others promised transparency. The message was clear. This wasn't a PR blip. It was a reckoning. Back at Airbright, the fallout spread. The crew from Flight 624, 2 attendants, 1 supervisor, and the gate agent were all let go. Their names were never released publicly, but within industry circles, the message was loud and clear. This will not be brushed aside. Behind closed doors, whispers turned to confessions. A whistleblower came forward. An anonymous letter sent to multiple news outlets revealed that Airbright had quietly allowed a policy 2 years earlier. An unspoken rule. Protect premium passengers, even if it meant reassigning someone who had already paid. Malik read the article late one night, sitting beside Leona on the couch. She scrolled through her phone while he stared at the screen. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just try and make sense of all this." She took his hand. "You didn't ask for any of it," she said, "but you handled it with grace. That matters." He looked at her, eyes tired but calm. "I didn't even raise my voice." "I know," she said. "That's what scared them the most." That weekend, a national magazine published a full-page feature. A seat taken. How one quiet passenger challenged an industry. The photo was simple. No microphone. No spotlight. Just Malik. Back straight. Eyes focused. As if to say, "I'm still here." The weeks passed, but the impact didn't fade. Other airlines followed. Delta, JetBlue, Southwest, all released statements affirming their commitment to fair seating policies. Some went further. They invited passengers to submit stories of past mistreatment. They promised internal reviews. They promised change. It wasn't perfect, but the silence was finally broken, and it had started with a single voice. Malik Johnson didn't become a celebrity. He didn't sign book deals or launch a podcast. He didn't cash in. He went back to his family, back to folding laundry unevenly, back to trying and failing to figure out the smart TV. To his kids, he was still just dad, but even they could sense something had shifted. One night, his daughter, Ari, 11 years old, looked up from her homework and asked, "Why did they make you move?" Malik paused. "Because they thought the other man was more important." "Were they right?" "No," he said, "but that's what they believed." And sometimes, if no one says anything, people keep believing things that aren't true. She nodded quietly, then asked, "Is that why you talked on TV?" He smiled. "Yeah, I wanted people to think harder about what fairness really means." But by then, it wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a policy shift. It was a movement. It was a lesson in stillness. Malik had sparked something that couldn't be reassigned. 2 months after the flight, he received another email from Carlton Drew. An update. The seat fairness framework had officially been adopted by 2 more airlines. It limited involuntary reassignments. It prioritized transparency. It required recorded testimonies, just like Malik had requested, at every quarterly review meeting. None of it made him rich. He still drove the same hybrid with the squeaky AC vent, still wore his old watch. But sometimes he'd receive letters from teachers, from veterans, from workers in cities he'd never been to. One came from a high school teacher in Missouri. She wrote, "I show your interview to my students when we talk about how small actions can mean big things. I tell them you don't have to shout. Just stay where you are if you've earned that space." Malik kept that letter, taped it inside his office drawer, folded and worn at the corners. It reminded him why he hadn't moved. Not just from a seat, but from his truth. One crisp morning in March, Malik booked a short flight to Sacramento. Business class. Seat 1C. He boarded early, placed his bag in the overhead, sat down. This time, no one asked him to move. No one offered a voucher. No one leaned in with a corporate smile. A flight attendant approached, her voice warm. "Anything I can get you before takeoff, Mr. Johnson?" Malik looked out the window for a moment, then turned back to her with a small smile. "No thank you," he said. "I'm good. Right here." Sometimes the most powerful act is not shouting, not fighting, not even standing up, but choosing to stay seated in the space you've earned. This story reminds us how easily dignity can be dismissed and how quietly injustice can occur, not with loud insults, but with smiles and procedures. But it also shows us that one moment of calm resistance can spark a ripple far greater than we ever expect. This story is a work of fiction, written to feel real, not because it happened, but because it could. It was created to reflect the truth many people have lived, in silence, in frustration, in systems that still forget to see the person in the seat. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of something important, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes just staying where you are is enough to change everything.